September 22nd of 2007 was a Saturday. And at this point, it seemed like each day was getting worse and worse. I woke up that morning and I got a phone call from the young man that I was dating. He actually lived in another state, and he had told me that he was going to fly in that day. He had already purchased his ticket, and that he was coming to be supportive of me because I felt like I was just going crazy. And so we made plans to go to Six Flags that day, and my mom thought it would be a good idea for me to get out the house after everything that was happening and to go have some fun. And so my daughter and I got in the car and headed over to pick him up at the airport later on. And when I picked him up, I remember him just being angry with me, and I didn't understand why. And he said the reason why that he was so angry was because he had called me while I was on my way, and I didn't pick up the phone. And I didn't hear that the phone that it was ringing when he called. And he kept that attitude almost his whole time that he was visiting. And so we went to Six Flags, and I remember that day it was very nice outside, but it seemed like any and everything associated with evil I immediately drew to. I picked up on it, and it brought fear to me. I remember walking into Six Flags and just thinking about the number 6 and noticing gargoyles around it, which I had never noticed before. All the people there, and out of everybody, I noticed this guy with a shirt that had evil on it in green letters. And so I still couldn't eat, and I remember walking in, and there was a point where we sat down to eat, and I remember really wanting a hug. I felt like a hug from this young man would have comforted me. And I remember him looking at me, still angry, kind of disgusted. He asked me what was wrong with me. And I remember thinking, but I didn't speak it, that I wanted a hug from him. And then my daughter spoke, and she said she wants a hug. And then he said, "Will you give her a hug?" He told my daughter that, and I remember thinking, I want one from you. And I didn't speak it, and she said she wants one from you. It was really strange. It was like whatever I thought, she would speak it. And so he got up and hugged me, and it didn't help. And so as we went through the park, I began to feel horrible. I felt like all these people were around me, and they were laughing, and they were smiling, and they were having a good time. But I felt like I was the only one in the world. I felt so lonely. I felt so sad. I felt so down. I felt like I was in a situation where no one could reach me, no one could help me, and I felt like this is how I was going to die. This is how the rest of my life was going to be. And thoughts of suicide began to come up strong. Thoughts of, you may as well end it now because you can't take living this way for any longer. And I remember getting on the ride, and I remember seeing people smiling and laughing, and I couldn't even smile. But then there was another feeling that was there. I wasn't one, I'm still not one that really likes roller coasters, but I had this feeling that if I got on a roller coaster, that I wouldn't be afraid, that I could get on and I could just ride it and I wouldn't scream, and I'd have my eyes open and everything. And so there was a point where there was a water ride there, and I remember wanting to get on it, but I had on all white, and you don't ride rides where you get wet when you have on all white. But then I decided towards the end of our time there to get on the ride, because I had this feeling that if I get in water, I would be all right. And there's little ponds at Six Flags, and I remember looking down at that water, and I remember thinking, if I can get in that water, I will be okay. If I can get in the water, I'll be okay. I was almost mesmerized, like I couldn't stop looking at it. And so we got on the water ride, and I couldn't wait for the water to come over us. And when it did, I remember feeling so good for a few seconds. And as we were walking out, we stopped and got something to eat, and I got a piece of rock candy, and I was able to eat all of that. And as we were walking to the car, I had the stick in my hand, I was going to throw it down. But then I remembered that I can't stand littering, so I kept it in my hand. And the next thought that came to my mind was to jab myself in the eye with a stick. So at this point, I was afraid, and I didn't trust myself. And I definitely didn't trust myself to be behind the wheel, driving myself and my daughter and this man home, all the way home. And so I remember asking him if he would drive, and he was still angry with me. And he said, "I don't think so." And so we got in the car, we drove, and we stopped at the store. And as we were driving, and even when we got to the store, I remember the thought came to my mind to ask that lady, Linda, who I had been speaking to over the phone, if I could come to her church. I didn't know the name of her church. I didn't know what they taught. I didn't know what they preached. But the thought came to my mind, ask her if you can come to her church. But then another thought came and countered against it and was telling me, you don't want to go to her church. Al's going to think you're stupid. And so I didn't call her, but when I got home, I remember trying to eat again and I couldn't. And so I went away from him and I called her. And I remember asking her if I can come to her church, and she said, yeah, anytime. So I got the phone with her. And then I remember thinking about being baptized. But then the thought came, you don't want to be baptized. You don't even know what that means. You're not even ready. But then another thought came and was telling me to give her a call and ask her about it. So I called her back and I said, can I be baptized? Not understanding about what the baptism was. And she said, sure, anytime. And so the thought came to my mind to ask her, how do you know when you're ready? And I asked her, how do I know when I'm ready? And she simply replied, when you believe. And at this point, I knew I had no other choice but to believe. And I knew that I truly did believe. Later on that night, Al was very upset because he had wanted us to go stay at a hotel. And I didn't want to stay at a hotel. I mean, these weird things were happening to me. I told him I wasn't going to fornicate. So I wanted just to stay at home with my family. And my mom even welcomed him to stay at our house, but he got angry. And so to just make matters better, I thought, I just went along with him. But my brother had to drop us off because we were down to one car. We normally had 4. But my stepdad was at work. My brother's car had a flat tire. My car was still at work. And so my brother had agreed, since he was going to hang out, to go drop us off at the hotel. So he took us to a hotel in the area. And I remember when we got out his car, he had told me that he had put something in my bag. And so when I got upstairs in the hotel room and I opened up my bag, there was a picture of Jesus that we had purchased from the dollar store. My brother actually, I remember buying it. He picked it out one Christmas years ago before any of this happened. And we set it on our mantle that year for Christmas and we never took it down. But he had taken it down that day and he had stuck it in my bag. And so when I got to the hotel, I propped it up on the counter. And I remember that night, the young man that I was dating was a smoker, so he opened up the window. And I remember him making a comment that it was strange that this window had no screen and yet it opened all the way up and we were on the 3rd floor. Usually windows are bolted when you're up that high. And when he said it, the thought crossed my mind that I should jump out the window. And I thank the Lord that I didn't, because I felt that pressure so heavy. It was almost like it was better just to do it, to get this, whatever it was, to stop telling me to do it. Or, just to get the thought from crossing my mind. It was easier just to jump out the window to get it over with. But I thank the Lord that I didn't. And so I remember Al telling me earlier, he said, are you going to live in fear? And that just shows me what the Bible says, that the devil sometimes will try to use the word of God in a twisted way to convince you to do the wrong thing. And I remember Al asking me at the hotel, he said, what were you so afraid of? And my reply was unusual. And I remember saying, I don't know, maybe my alarm won't go off. And so I set my phone alarm because we were supposed to go to church the next morning. And Al called the front desk and he placed a request for a wake-up call. And that night, I remember we were getting ready to fornicate, and before it could happen, I felt this almost like a hot spatula, like somebody took a hot spatula and pressed it on my forehead. And I knew that I couldn't do what we were trying to do, and so we stopped, and we ended up praying before we went to sleep.
All the signs of life, they're all around me. With every heartbeat I feel so alive. and joy and sadness, peace and madness. If only I can fight just a little longer, I know it's gonna make me stronger. I just keep holding on to what I believe. Oh, I believe in you. Give me the strength to fight and a heart to believe when it's hard to believe in you. Oh, and these are the times